The first order of business is to
Recording in progress.
Adopt the agenda. I'd entertain a motion.
I move that we adopt the agenda.
Keith Morrow moved. Can I have a second?
I second the motion.
Carol McBride seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye or thumbs up. Anyone opposed? Any abstention? Motion carries. The agenda is adopted. I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes of January 18, 2022.
I move that we adopt the minutes.
Keith Morrow moves for adoption. Can I have a second?
Second. I second that.
Second, Troy Parity. All those in favor of adopting, before we do that, any discussion on the minutes from January 18th? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye or giving a thumbs up. Anyone opposed? Anybody abstaining? Motion carries. The minutes are approved. The next piece is to give updates of communications received outside of the meeting. Tracy's going to give an update on just the communication from Rebecca Coffey and what information she provided to Rebecca.
Sure. Yes, because Rebecca's questions were kind of technical, factual, and not necessarily and informational, and not necessarily judgment, opinion, and board work. I will answer those. She asked about what CBA stands for. You'll see that in some of the documents we've reviewed, including the draft work plan. She asked about staff assignments for the first year and how that relates to configuration of schools, and what is the difference between school configuration and school of attendance. CBA stands for collective bargaining agreements. That's a term that relates to the agreements between the union and the employer, typically. And when it comes to school configurations, and that typically speaks to what schools are operated and what grades they serve, and in some cases, which towns or the residents of children who attend that school. Remember that these the statutes that guide what's required in the Articles of Agreement were originally designed around forming union schools. So that kind of consideration was pretty significant if that's the kind of organization you are seeking to form. School attendance means simply what school a student goes to. And we know that that's a really important thing to consider to help parents understand what to expect in year one or the first couple of years. And staff assignment is where teachers are assigned to teach and how employees are assigned to staff those individual schools. Again, that's most relevant when if we were talking about forming a union school of some sort. Sheila and Patrick will be presenting tonight, hopefully, on transition options and opportunities, and that will help kind of complete the big picture that we talked about supporting the committee in getting, and can illuminate further how those kinds of issues might be addressed in the Articles of Agreement. And I do hope that you'll have time for discussion tonight before the meeting ends, so we have some direction and can dive more deeply into those areas. So that's the questions from committee members that we got this week. Mary Kate, do you want me to keep going through the rest of them?
Why don't you hang on for 1 second? We
Sure.
also got some comments.
Okay.
We just got email today from Dave Sharp, just commenting on the op-ed and reiterating what he expressed at the last meeting, that he thinks that the 706 study committee isn't what the Mount Abe Union School District Board limited our work to. And then Brad Johnson also sent some feedback on the op-ed, indicating that he thought the fourth paragraph of the voters' decision glosses over the issue that Dave raised in his motion about the right of individual towns as opposed to districts to vote on potential closures or repurposing, and states that that's was the catalyst for Lincoln and Starksboro to withdraw or contemplate withdrawing. And then also Brad reiterated what Dave had just said, what I just explained, and Dave said in his email about the purpose of the committee from the Mount Abe Union School District. Also indicated that he had objections to the underlying demographic and tax-related assumptions of the problems we face, indicating they're not supported by the evidence and tend to be reactive rather than proactive. And that indicated that we haven't modified our approach to accommodate widespread community skepticism about potential merger, especially with regard to the town vote issue. So those were just some comments, but we did, the op-ed was provided before the last meeting and people had an opportunity in the last meeting to discuss those, but those were some additional comments received since the last meeting. Tracy, you want to go ahead and move on to the those next pieces, the resources and draft work plan?
Sure. Just wanted to let you know that per questions at the last meeting, I updated the question and answers document, and on pages 3 and 4, there is information about who can serve on a school board and who can serve on a study committee, and a little bit more about potential conflicts of interest. Much of that is a reiteration of the discussion last time, but wanted to be sure that that information was clearly available. So that is there. We also attached to the agenda the final version of the op-ed. I think maybe many of you have seen that already circulating around, but wanted to be certain that you all had a copy of that and knew what it said. The updated and ever-changing draft work plan was also attached, as it has been for every meeting. I made a few changes in the meeting schedule in consultation with the co-chairs to reflect the changes in meeting dates that you approved around the February and March meeting schedule, to clearly recognize that tonight's meeting is dedicated to some time to debrief the New Solutions K-12 report, and for you to finish doing the work that you asked to do around getting that big picture, and then hopefully following discussion tonight and perhaps some direction, a return to articles in March and April. That said, it continues to be a dynamic process, and we'll continue to adjust the work as you make decisions and express needs in areas that you want to understand further, and also as outside forces such as legislative activity or the emergence of important reports become available. And that is a perfect segue to new resources on board structure. Attached to the agenda are two things: a one-pager that was drafted by Legislative Counsel, which describes the three structures that might be framed in a rewrite of Chapter 11, and a complete copy of the draft rewrite to Chapter 11 with a note, because it's like 120 pages, that the sections on board structures are pages, I can't remember what pages they are, 29 to 34, I think. And I just wanted to be sure you knew that that is out there. Obviously, it's not done until the legislature enacts law, but to the extent possible, I want to be sure that you have access to the latest thinking on things that we're talking about. So as you conclude your process, you're prepared to either revise quickly or already in alignment with the direction that any legislative changes might go. What's important is that it frames the three options more narrowly. That hybrid mode between proportional by town and at large seems a little less flexible and more defined than the original materials that we were using for discussion. So I just wanted you to know that that was out there. We'll come back to it. But if you have a grocery store conversation with someone about board configurations, you at least know between now and the time we get to discuss them more thoroughly that there's additional information for us to sift through. And that is it.
Any questions on that? Okay, thank you, Tracy. Next item on the agenda is the hypothetical transition process and opportunities. The superintendents, Patrick Green of MAUSD and Sheila Soul of ANWSD are going to present on this.
I'm sorry, could we back up a second? This is Kevin.
Yeah, Kevin.
So so there was a discussion about the op-ed, and I don't see what's going to happen to it. Is it just in limbo, or are we going to decide to publish it, or what?
The decision was made at the last meeting, giving approval. It's been put out there. I was just sharing comments that we received outside of the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So I don't know, Patrick or Sheila, how do you guys want to proceed with that?
Just wanted to do a quick check to see if you wanted to do the discussion of the K-12 New Solutions report, or we could jump right into the.
Yep. Sorry, I missed that. Yeah, why don't we do that first? Tracy, go ahead, and then Sheila and Patrick will give the next presentation.
So I didn't prepare anything in particular. My hope was that Mary Kate and Martha would facilitate an opportunity for individual committee members to share what was significant to them from the presentation at the MAUSD board meeting, and maybe perhaps identify questions that we could send back to the MAUSD board or Nate for consideration in his final revisions, and perhaps highlight anything that's significant for the committee's work. So Mary Kate, I would let you facilitate that if you're willing.
Yeah, that sounds great. Do we, given that report was, fairly significant and comprehensive, my thought would be to just sort of go around the committee and have each member share kind of what their thoughts were on that. And if there are anything, we didn't hire Nate, MAUSD hired Nate. So if there's anything that we want follow up on, we could ask if the MAUSD board would follow up with Nate on something, or if Patrick would. Does that make sense? So I'm just going to go in the order I see you guys on the screen. Kevin, why don't you go first if you're willing?
Sure. Obviously, we're wrestling with two issues. One is how to operate elementary schools and how to operate high schools, and that's that's been apparent, at least to me, from the get-go. His solutions for elementary schools, he heard loud and clear from the community input group that he was talking with, that may or may not be biased, but nonetheless, the concern about local schools, and that carried through his report. He came up with some, I wouldn't say radical, but some pretty innovative ways to work around that and attempt to keep, at least on the MAUSD side, the schools in operation as we see them today. He came down, in my opinion, very much in favor of the consolidation of the two districts, and was specific in saying that he thought a unified union would be the preferred way, and he had rationale, not so much from a CAS point of view, but just the operational aspects of the fragmentation that a supervisory union would create, and the continuity of being able to, for instance, attract qualified people to operate it, among other things. He held a caveat that he thought it was important that towns retain the right to vote. I have mixed feelings about that, but I understand where he's coming from on that. And I think he really implicitly has supported or given support to our efforts here, which I'm pleased with, as opposed to having a different opinion that would necessarily tear us apart. And he talked about the importance of healthy high schools, much more so than elementary schools. I thought that was important as well. So that's kind of where I got out of it.
Thanks, Kevin. Rebecca?
Yeah, on page 13, 6C, I was a little concerned about what was said there. It says 6C, a priority on more students in a grade level to support a wider range of offerings and social interaction. And this could be achieved in a number of ways, such as combining high school students with the neighboring districts at Mount Abe or a new regional school. And that was concerning to me only because it didn't mention coming to our school at BUHS. And it's, that's concerning because we talked about busing routes to Mount Abe for high school and not our high school, busing routes to our high school. We've always talked about high school at Mount Abe, not high school at Virgins. And I have to say that our middle high school has a lot to offer, such as we have 2 gyms. We have newer updated spaces such as science labs, band and high school chorus rooms, art rooms. These were talked about when the new updates were done in 2001. They were talked about with the principal when they were updated, with the high school band and chorus teachers, and with the art room teachers. And there's sunshine in each of these rooms, which isn't in all of the high school rooms and middle school rooms at Mount Abe. I would really appreciate a walkthrough of each of the high schools and middle school with the merger committee, just to see what is offered in each of these facilities. And I just was really, that really just struck a note with me. Like, really, we're gonna say it didn't even offer that opportunity. Like, it was just like, oh, you should come here and we should build a new building. It wasn't like said, oh, we should look at this other building as an opportunity for high school.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. Maybe, and we can talk about this later, but maybe part of it's looking at, obviously he was just hired by MAUSD for this report. So he his report's limited to that, but it may be worthwhile to follow up with questions in terms of, to what extent are some of his recommendations universal, and either him or the board even, or the committee even doing a walkthrough, something for us to
Right.
consider. Yeah.
What I'm saying though, it is just one-sided, and we don't have that report for our ANWSD. And so we don't have that. And so we're spending this much time on that one report, and that concerns me.
Yep. Okay, Dustin.
Well, I mean, there was so much because it was a very comprehensive report, but I mean, some things that stuck out for me was, when it looked at some of the proposals that were tuitioning 9 through 12 students out of district, and the discovery that would be less cost effective than actually educating them here in our own school facilities. So I wasn't shocked by that, but that was something that stuck out. And I also, other models that I thought of, like, for example, like putting grades 7 and 8 back into the town schools, and that really didn't meet all the evaluation criteria. It'd be limiting the peer group for children in that age, and extracurricular opportunities, and buildings would need some retrofitting to make that happen. I thought it was a very well done study. It was very comprehensive. And I also was pleased that, it did find lots of other ways beyond school configuration where we could be saving costs. A merger is one way, but he did find us very heavy in sort of administration and middle management, so to speak. And there's lots of cost savings to be realized there, whether a merger happens or not. So I think there's a lot of value to this report, and a lot of good guidance, for our current boards or future boards, if we merge, to follow, to to have more efficient schools and do better for our kids.
Thanks, Dustin. I'm going to actually go out of order because, Troy, I know you have to leave. So
thanks.
Yeah.
You can hear me? Yeah, I have to agree with things that people have said so far, and I'm bummed I'm not going to be able to stay for the whole meeting because I think there's so many things to talk about. I liked his presentation a lot. I thought he was clear, and he spoke to the community in a way that we could all understand. And I appreciated that about his presentation. I, like Dustin, I also appreciated the variety of things he sort of was sharing that could be. And I think we have to remember that everything that he was presenting was just a could be scenario, but it sort of opens our eyes to the fact that there's many ways to think about moving forward. But I also got the sense that some of it is we need to think about community building, not just school building, and how do we let this process bring our communities together and not separate us. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. And I think it's really important that we keep that central focus on whatever we choose to do moving forward to make education affordable for taxpayers and the best possible educational scenario we can for students pre-K through 12. It's going to come with some things that not everybody loves, but we have to do what works the best to hold to the sort of the things that we most want. And I like that he kept talking about the the guidelines that were given to him and having to follow those. And I think that's important for us to think about is these schools are a reflection of our community, and our community is a reflection of our schools. And I like that he had some good ideas. And to chime in on what Rebecca said, I was also noticing that it was all really, and I understand that he was hired by the Mount Abe School Board, but it was, a one-sided look. I really like the idea of sister schools and sharing, and you could even extend that out, with the big shared district. When I started teaching in Burlington, I worked at the high school half-time and a middle school half-time, so I was a full-time teacher. And the ability to attract teachers is getting harder and harder, and for a part-time job, it's almost a non-starter for most people. So, just thinking about things that are going to be important to us as we move forward, in terms of staffing and options that we have. I thought he proposed a lot of really interesting things.
Thanks, Troy. Erica?
I don't have a whole lot to say. I would echo Rebecca's remarks about just feeling like as we go along, we are accumulating a lot of input from the Mount Abe district, and there seems to be comparatively less input from our district. and I think that my sense of that is it makes some people in our district nervous because we feel that the reason there's so much coming out of Mount Abe's district is because people are frankly not happy there. And so, if they're not happy in our district, at least it's not as evident. So that said, I really did appreciate the presentation. But the one thing that, really sunk in for me or stuck out to me is the emphasis on, I think he used the term efficiency minded or there was some term that he used very often that to me said, this is going to be no matter what we do going forward, and especially if towns want to keep their small community schools, there's going to need to be compromises made. And he didn't really seem to specify like what compromises. I guess that would be up to the schools, but that there's a certain amount of efficiency you can get from implementing the sister school model and having, staff be able to work together or work easily in one school part-time and another school another time. But that overall, that I guess essentially you can't have everything. If you want to have your small community schools, then you're going to have to recognize it's going to cost more, or you're going to have fewer programs. And that was just like, a reality check, I think, for me.
Thanks, Erica. Stephanie?
Hello. First, I want to say I was really grateful to have an outside consultant making recommendations, someone without the emotional ties to our district. I felt really proud that we were doing many of the elements that he had suggested, like having sister schools and combining positions, like teachers being instructional coaches and schedulers being teachers, consolidating programs and making efficiencies. We have done a really great job over the past 10 years in doing these recommendations. I'm not sure how much more we can do this and not greatly decrease student outcomes. Currently, we're short-staffed, and I can't really see how much more we can cut without it really negatively impacting students. He stated to allow towns to vote to agree to a merger. And like Kevin, I do have concerns. It's so hard. And then I also thought it was really interesting that his recommendations were to consolidate grade levels. So like combining all sixth graders. And I'm interested how much of a savings there would be to combine fifth grade and sixth grade, seventh and eighth. There are quite a few schools around the state that have 5 through 8 schools, and they have great success. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Stephanie. Keith?
Thanks. As people have mentioned, there's a lot to process here. And it's really nice to see, as Sarah said, an outside expert weigh in a lot of these things that I know the ANWSD has been having conversations about this for a very long time and taking action to try to mitigate our own financial problems while maintaining, great student experiences. So seeing some of these things from our side of the aisle, some of it's reaffirming it in some of the actions that we have taken, some of the things we've discussed in district. But there's only so many moving parts, and I think our district has arrived at a place where there's not much left to shave out of programming. There are fewer and fewer moving parts as we go along, hence the reason we're here having this discussion. And it does look like there are potentially significant benefits of finding a way to have a merged district, whatever that may look like. Yeah, I don't have very many questions, I suppose.
Thanks, Keith. I'm going to jump to Sarah LaPearl because she has some other conflicts as well.
I'm good now. They're over. I appreciated his options on the cost-effective mindset versus the town schools. I appreciated I thought he was a really good speaker, and he was pretty clear about really what we could do or not do. And that, to me, I think he kind of reaffirmed why we're here. And that this has always been really about the secondary or middle school, high school scenario versus and less about our elementary schools as far as our committee has been, but that we could, and also about central office and just options there. And yeah, I kind of agree with what a lot of people have said. I'm still not totally convinced about the town voting thing, even after that presentation. But besides that, I felt like it was a good presentation. I don't know if I have much more to add.
Thanks, Sarah. Dave?
Thank you. So, yeah, I thought it was a very good presentation, very thoughtful. I want to just start by saying what impressed me about him was his positive tone. Not coming from a place of fear, but coming from a place of, we're doing a pretty good job now, and we have some positive options in front of us, and we need to work our way through them. So I just think that was a great tone to set. I was struck probably most definitely by the graph. I don't have it open, so I don't recall the page, but it showed the elementary school population in MAUSD relatively stable throughout the next decade or so. And it showed concurrently a declining enrollment at the high school level, middle and high school level. So I think he was identifying the problem really at the middle and high school level, and endorsing the notion of the merger, as Kevin pointed out. I think that he was specific in his notion that closing a school creates long-term hard feelings. And I think we see that certainly in MAUSD, we see that happening in Lincoln and Starksboro. I guess from what I've read on Front Porch Forum and elsewhere, that those same kind of things are happening in Addison over on your side of the state. And so I think coming from that notion as much as anything else, he felt that the vote for towns to ratify closing their school was important. As I said weeks ago, I think he opened the door for different kinds of creative mergers, if you will, or relationships between our district and your district, between MAUSD and ANWSD, which brought to mind the way a lot of tech centers in the state operate, where morning classes are the basics, if you will, or the required courses, and then electives or more specialized courses you'd get a bus to in the afternoon. That could be done without governance merger. He did talk about, I agree, he talked about there being too much administration, middle management, I think is what Dustin referred to it as. And he also, I think, said that while we have embraced the ideas of coaches and MTSS that he strongly supports, he feels that they could be executed better than they are currently. I liked his notions about sister schools and cost-effective education in our elementary schools. I guess that's on that's the list that I have written, just made notes on. But as Troy said, I think it's a big document. There's a lot in there, a lot to discuss and move forward on, both for MAUSD and for this merger concept. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Carol?
Okay, so I think the first thing that jumped out to me was the discussion with the elementary schools and a cost-effective mindset. I think it's just so important to make sure that people keep that in mind, especially when the discussions about the small community elementary schools come up, because even if the schools stay opened, what they look like will probably change dramatically just due to fiscal needs. So that's very important to keep in mind, even though that's not the point of this study committee or anything else we're doing. It just keeps coming up. So we have to continually remind the community of that, because we're not looking at a status quo versus drastic change. There will be change regardless of what we recommend. That's just inevitable based on budgeting. I also have some reservations about single town votes. I do think it's very important to maintain some sort of voting option if we talk about closing of schools, but I'm not convinced that single town voting is the way to go because of the emotional feeling or the feelings around your ties to the school and the community. It's easier if it's a broader view and if other towns can have a say in that as well. I also agree with Becca as my concerns about busing were not alleviated. And I felt like the comment that if a merger is not very carefully managed financially, then the savings opportunities can be lost. I think that's a very important point to drive home, is that if this is not done right, we've lost our opportunity. And we have to keep that in mind with every thought and every decision and every conversation we have, because we can only do this once, hopefully, if we do it right. And then I am actually really grateful we're finally having a conversation that allows for some discussion of creative educational opportunities and what a merger could mean. We've done a lot of learning of what the schools and the districts look like, what busing could look like, but we haven't had an opportunity to talk about what educational opportunities can happen, how we can change those. And I think this is finally coming up. And I know for myself, that's one of the main reasons I wanted to be on this committee. So I'm really excited about that. And the thing that jumped out to me the most is the idea of the sister schools. So the overall management is merged, but then the schools are run in cooperation, but not as a sole school. And I think given the busing situation, I think we should really discuss whether this might be a worthwhile option, because there would be a lot of opportunity to specialize the schools. And as Dave said, career tech centers do run in this way. Even in our own districts, we send kids to Middlebury for the career center regularly. So why not consider that for other students, maybe for AP classes, languages. And also, we're all very attuned to using new technologies like Zoom, thanks to the pandemic. So we could take advantage of those situations, and not necessarily bus kids back and forth, but somehow arrange for classrooms where students can participate no matter where they are, and have those opportunities with only a single French teacher or only a single Spanish teacher in the whole district, but still have them available. And I really think that would benefit the communities. And that's what the population, the community wants to hear, is how are we actually going to benefit the students with the educational opportunities. So I'm glad we're having this conversation now. Thanks.
Thanks, Carol. Martha?
Sure. It is a big, huge report. So I think I'll just kind of talk about one. Of course, my biggest thing was the fact of not understanding, but also not including Virgens in there, the question of that. So I need to probably think of something else. But I also was looking at the numbers. The numbers really stuck out at me, and well, the high school numbers drop and the elementary is not as much. My biggest thing was, I'm looking for it on my other screen, sorry, where it stated that the possibility, one of them was to possibly merge the high schools, or the 7 through 12, but not the elementary schools, or combine those with the neighboring district. And I don't love that idea. I think if it's, I am thinking at this time that if we propose to have a merger, that it should be the entire district, but I'm welcome to be educated on more. And so that's kind of my thoughts on that particular section.
Thanks, Martha. Is there anyone that I missed that's on the study committee?
Mary.
Sorry, Mary. Yes. Go ahead, Mary.
Hi, sorry, I was late. I mostly just want to echo most of what the Virgens people said, but I thought it was interesting because all this talk about sister schools and efficiency minded, I feel like in some ways Addison Northwest has had a little bit more experience with this. Before we closed Addison, we were sharing a lot of things between Ferrisburg and Addison. I think we still have some positions that are going back and forth between Ferrisburg and Virgens, or Ferrisburg and the high school. So some of the ways that Mount Abe could save money, I feel like we have maxed out. And much like Keith said, the moving pieces in Virgens is probably lesser than Mount Abe, because we've been crunched in different ways. I really want to keep in mind the community feedback around middle school. If we were going to bring 5th and 6th or 6th graders up, I strongly believe that they still need recess. And what they do at the middle school in Virgins anyways, walking around the building is not adequate for 5th and 6th graders, or probably even 6th graders. In some ways, I don't think it's adequate for 7th graders either. So that is something I would like to keep in mind. We shared a bus with Mount A for indoor track this season, and it is a 13-minute ride. I would get a call from the coach when they were on their way. So it is 13 minutes, which is a lot of commuting if you are a parent that's dropping off and picking up from the high school every single day. But I don't know, it doesn't seem like an unsurmountable amount of time to me, but it is extra time that parents will be driving because you have after school activities, you're picking kids up, it's an extra half an hour of your life. So I think that's something we need to be mindful of. And I think I'm with everyone where I really want every town to have a vote on whether their school closes, but I have big concerns that the emotions around these decisions are going to override logic and what needs to happen every single time, because we love our schools and we love our communities, sometimes beyond reason. So that is a concern that I'm keeping in my mind. I loved how upbeat this report was and the presentation was, but I worry sometimes that the money they say we're going to save is not real money unless, like Carol said, it is managed impeccably, because there are always hidden costs to things. We moved our EEE program from Virgins to Ferrisburg to save money, and then we had to build a new preschool playground, and that was something I don't think anyone accounted for. There's always things like that when you move populations of children that are unaccounted for costs. And sometimes we see these reports and we're like, oh, we're going to save $6 million, but they don't know that something else is going to have to go in there. We're going to have to reconfigure some space. Then we're going to discover mold underneath a wall that we knocked down. So every time I see savings, I'm like, how much of that is actually real? Yeah, so that's it.
Okay. I just echo really what everybody said. I think I was really encouraged that there is a way to keep local schools and still do that in a cost-effective way, with the cost-effective mindset. So I was encouraged that he came up with a alternative that was still cost effective. I do share Mary's concerns about the passion we all feel for our local schools and our ability to make decisions that might be in the best interest of students in the whole district, as versus closing our local schools. But given that there's another path, that concern is less prominent for me. I was really impressed with his experience level. I felt that having, somebody, as people have said, didn't have connection to our district, but also had a lot of experience working with school districts that are dealing with issues like ours and usually worse than ours. I just found, and his ability to come up with, or through that experience, have different ways to think about it than the ways we've all been thinking about, or at least I have, really helpful. In terms of the high school and middle school. I thought his support for merger really dovetailed with what we found from the community in terms of people feeling that having more programming and more social emotional support for children is what we got from community feedback, and he seemed to indicate that was really a main reason for merging middle and high schools. And then yeah, so that's sort of what main points I came away with from it. I do want to circle back to this question in terms of, he was hired by MAUSD and gave the report for MAUSD, didn't include looking at Addison Northwest. Are there people who want to kind of look at, well, are there questions to ask him, or do you want Martha and I to kind of look at that and kind of go back to him? It looks like Tracy maybe has an idea. Go ahead, Tracy.
Well, I took careful notes through all of your reporting out and tried to listen to places where there might be action steps and follow-up. And related to that particular question, what I heard was maybe a follow-up question for Nate Levinson and MAUSD around what are the generalizations that can apply or might reasonably apply to ANWSD. I can think of one that the answer might be yes, and that was that key point that Nate made around the more students you have in a grade level, the more efficient and the more opportunities you're able to provide. Is that a transferable generalization? Similarly, we could ask that question of the Addison Northwest School District Board and ask them about what pieces of the report resonated with them, understanding that some folks on this committee are also on that board, and ask them about the other options they've considered. I know they shared some of that very early in the process, and board members have alluded to that here, but we certainly could follow up by asking those questions. And I also want to assure you that I was taking notes about things that I heard each of you say were important to consider going forward. And without diving into the details of all of those notes, would like to help you think about how in articles of agreement and or in recommendations back to your two respective boards, how you shape a process where those issues might be explored and addressed, like somehow affirming the importance of a process for if there's an expansion of middle school grades, how do we make sure that middle school best practice or advocate in the articles or in a recommendation that be foundational to the planning process? What could we put into the articles or recommendations if you choose not to recommend a unified union that goes to the vote to address the issues of transportation beyond the parameters of what you can address in the first year of operations? So I have notes on that, and I'll continue to listen and can help with action steps on any of those things if you decide they're relevant.
Thanks, Tracy. Kevin?
So I'll just put in a biased perspective on his report. His report addressed, I don't know how many, several community proposals as well as Patrick's or the superintendent's proposal. And some of the reaction that the people from Virgins are wondering why Virgins wasn't more readily discussed about it is, quite honestly, the only proposal that considered a merger was the superintendent's. The other proposals, if not all of them, most of them proposed to do away with the high school and tuition out students wherever. So there wasn't a lot of fodder, if you will, for him to drive a lot of options or considerations about a merger, other than what he spun off the superintendent's report. And there was one report there was one proposal that proposed a county school, essentially it'd be Middlebury, Virgins, and Bristol, or whatever the district names are. And then that was lately discussed in there as acknowledging the components of the different community proposals. So he broke down community proposals into segments or aspects, if you will, and by and large addressed those, as opposed to and he did some freewheeling, but it was rather limited.
Rebecca.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, I think that it would be good to talk about VUHS and how it plays into this more, because I think he really addressed the elementary schools really well, but I don't think he really talked about how VUHS and Mount Abe's district would merge adequately. I feel like it was really one-sided and really didn't look into how it would really blend well. And so I think that really needs to be looked into, especially from our side, as from ANWSD side, because I felt like when I was reading it really left us out, and when I was reading it, it was really harmful from our perspective. And I just feel like that needs to be looked into.
Sheila?
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, he wasn't hired to analyze that. So, and we did look into, I just want to underscore something that I think Tracy has already said. We have, and many of you have already said, we have fewer moving parts, I think is what someone referred to. Like, we have explored a lot of these options. So we looked into hiring Nate ourselves, and with 2 K through 6 and 1 7 through 12, there really wasn't much that we thought we would get from him coming to give us options going forward. His charge working with Mount Abe was to explore their options independent of this merger study. So that was his charge and his task. It wasn't about serving the needs of this combined group necessarily. So I don't think it was a purposeful exclusion of our benefits and our facilities and the possibilities therein.
And I get that, Sheila. I'm just saying we've spent like 45 minutes on his study, and we haven't talked at all about our needs for 45 minutes. And so I feel like that's a very big disadvantage to ANWSD. And so that's what I'm putting out there.
Erica?
I just wanted to follow up, Kevin, on your comment. As a person in ANWSD, I don't have a really great sense of what is happening in MAUSD, but it sounded to me like you were saying that at least the people who put these proposals together, and I don't know how much they reflect the whole community, but that there is a feeling in your district that the high school should be abandoned. And to me, that's important kind of just context for this proposal of merging our two districts. Because if that is the case, then I feel like, well, in some ways, bringing our two districts together could bring people back into a community feeling of being proud of their high school and wanting to have a high school. I mean, I feel like in Vergennes, the high school is really, that's like the centerpiece of, we're really proud of our high school. And I can't imagine people saying we have to save our little town schools and we can just let our high school go. And if that's the case, I don't know. I feel like I'm surprised by that. And I wasn't aware that that was a sentiment, at least in a segment of your district. So I'd just like to hear a little more about that.
Go ahead, Kevin.
So I guess, I tried to preface a little bit about my bias, but if you look, and I can't remember if it's an appendix or what, but in the back of his report, he analyzes all of his community proposals, and his task was to analyze the community proposals and not to develop a solution or an evaluation, if you will. So he was maybe reactive in the sense, maybe it was reactive in the sense that he looked at these community proposals as well as the superintendents and dissected those for the pluses and minuses, if you will, and came up with this a la carte menu of, if you will, of all the different activities. And like I said, many, if not most, I would say most, if not all of the community proposals were really focused on preserving elementary schools, and not so focused on the high school. And I think a lot of them were just, well, we'll just tuition them out and that'll take care of that. And I think there was a widespread belief as well that tuitioning would be cheaper, which he documented as not being necessarily true. And I'm like I said, I'm sure there's some biases that I'm leading into this when I'm trying to be factual in the fact that he was rather limited in his scope of work to just evaluate those proposals.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful, and maybe Patrick or one of the board members could explain this, but the community proposals, my understanding is, were not like our communities voted and these are what we proposed. The MAUSD proposals, maybe somebody could talk about how those came about and what they represent. I think that might be helpful. Patrick, is that something you are able to do? Or
yeah, I can take a stab at it for sure. So I guess I'll start at the beginning. That's usually a good place to start. So the MAUSD board had engaged in a variety of ways with the community for, gosh, a year plus anyway, working to share information about the situation that we were forecasting, gathering thoughts and ideas and values from the community, leading up to a charge they gave me as superintendent. They said, so you've been part of this community engagement work for a year plus. We've been having these conversations as a board for 2 years now. We charge you, superintendent, with taking all of this information and telling us what you think we should do to respond to the financial pressures that we're anticipating. And so a couple of Decembers ago now, I gave the board what I thought was an idea to respond. That prompted a lot of reactions and thoughts from a lot of folks, and the board decided to open up to all community members. Any one or any group of people that were interested could submit their idea for how we respond to the financial pressures. And so I think there were 6 community proposals. Some have single people as authors, and others have groups of people that author them. And there was a process through which people could submit those, but all of the community proposals that were submitted, and including mine, those were what were given to Nate and his team and said, please look at all of these proposals and give the board sort of an apples to apples comparison with cost implications, logistical implications, et cetera, and help the board, position the board to be able to make an informed decision. And for the most part, it was evaluate these criteria. However, if you see something, given your experience, as Mary Kate mentioned, he's very experienced, has done this with hundreds of schools. If you see something in here that is something we should be considering as well, please include that. It was very clear he was not making recommendations of what should happen, as much as it was trying to provide that evaluation of the criteria. Engage in a process whereby lots of input was collected. He had a community input committee that represented community members, building administrators, to really flesh out a little bit further the board's criteria. Like, what criteria are we going to measure these against? So criteria was established, the board adopted that criteria, and then Nate and his team took it to that next level of what are the financial and logistical implications, and how do we measure these against the criteria? So I don't know if that's a helpful recap, and I can answer any more questions. I know Dawn is on the call as well, I think. So she's the chair of the MAUSD board. She could elaborate, and we have several board members. So
yeah,
we can dig deep if we need to.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, it seems I saw people shaking their heads, so I think that is helpful. Dave, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you. So first, I want to apologize. I had an important phone call and missed some of the discussion. So I hope I'm not being redundant. My subjective and speculative view of things, and I can stand to be corrected. But the way I see it happening is that Patrick had this charge, and he put together what he thought was the best educational answer for the kids in our district. Unfortunately, that created fear and reaction, and we've had mostly fear and reaction to that proposal percolating through the other 6 proposals and percolating through our communities since that time. If we could wind the clock back and find a way to have a conversation with people in communities about what the best educational process would be for our elementary school students, we might eventually have gotten to the point where Lincoln or New Haven might have said, yeah, we see that our kids would be better off going down to school in Bristol. I don't know what that would have been, but I think that, we've gone through a really difficult, rough patch since a lot of people in the communities are in fear and reaction to a proposal that's 2 years old. And that's what was so refreshing about what Nate Levinson had to say, is that, wait a minute, let's look at this in a positive way. Let's look at how we can move forward in a positive way. And put some proposals on the table, some ideas on the table, picking and choosing from the various proposals that he felt were viable ways forward for our district. But I don't think we're out of the woods. I think we're in a position right now where it's a done deal in Lincoln in terms of them leaving, and I think that's my personal belief, is that that's really bad for the district as a whole. We have similar notions in Starksboro. I have heard very little out of New Haven, where I think they got something out of the superintendent's proposal. They got the administrative offices, and they got a preschool program. So that was something that made them feel less reactive than Lincoln and Starksboro to the vague notion of what inefficient schools would be. So yeah, we've come through a mess, and I think we're still in it, and I'm not really sure how we get through it. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. So hopefully that helps provide some framework for understanding the report. Our intention wasn't to present the report as how, him reporting on what our questions are, but we thought that the report would be helpful to us because it does touch on many of the things we're looking at. Erica, I see your hand.
I'm sorry. I just feel like I haven't really heard from people at MAUSD whether it's actually true that the parents and people in the district would prefer not to have a high school in their district. That surprised me, and I just wanted to hear more about the high school. We've heard a lot about the elementary schools, and we understand how very, very important they are, but we have not heard about the high schools. And so I didn't realize it was to the extent of we'd prefer to send our kids, school choice or something like that.
Maybe we can go around quickly and the Mount district members could say something. My impression is certainly Moncton, people are supportive of the high school, and we're proud of our high school, and that really those were just specific community members or groups of community members trying to solve the elementary school issue. Oops, Sarah.
Yeah, I felt like I'm very much in support of a high school. I think it's actually the glue that holds the whole community together, just like Virgins does. I went to Middlebury. I felt like that was really central to a lot of what occurred. And I also work at a really big high school, and I know that a lot of the opportunities that are there are because it's larger. And so for me, looking at the option to merge is to build something and make it better, not to have it to eliminate anything at all. I just have always felt like we could be stronger together. And I felt that way in Act 46, merging the towns, and I would feel that way with this. And I don't think it's about what we're killing. It's about what we're building together. And I feel really strongly or pretty saddened that the tax that was taken was about the elimination. I think was really the choice was about the elementary school and how to save that versus how to build us all together and come together, even within just MAUSD or within our county. So thanks. I agree with you, Erica, and I don't agree with what that we're trying to eliminate it. And I think that a lot of the voice that you've heard has come from a little bit, I don't want to use the word out of desperation, but a choice of an elementary school over a high school from some parts of some communities.
So we need to move on, but is there anybody from MAUSD that thinks the community supports not having a high school as a general proposition?
I'm from MAUSD. I teach at Mount Abe, and I view it as those proposals were given trying to solve the elementary school problem, and in a reaction to Patrick's proposal,
really. And I also think it's also coming on the heels of, we've had 3 failed efforts at a major renovation, very large multi-million-dollar renovation bond efforts at Mount Abe. So there's still, maybe a lot of misinformation in the community about the state of our building at Mount Abe. A lot of people aren't in it regularly. They don't know the improvements that have been made to the building in recent years. There's been a lot done in our building, and the building is in pretty good shape now and continues to get better and better. But so I think the combination of just, most of these proposals were, the opportunity to give proposals came out of, reaction to Patrick's proposals. So it was trying to solve the elementary school problem, really, and also still not maybe fully understanding the state of Mount Abe's building and making an assumption that it's needing much more in repairs than it does. So that's how I view it. But I don't feel there's a large sentiment that families think our high school should no longer operate. I think that's a very small sentiment in our communities. It was disappointing for me as a teacher at Mount Abe to see that proposed at all. But obviously those proposals were there, so somebody out there is feeling that way. I question whether they really know the state of the building or all the information, but I wouldn't say it's a large sentiment from my view.
Okay, so we've got some other hands raised and we need to wrap this up. I've kind of let this go on. We're behind schedule, and I'd like to have both Patrick and Sheila's presentation in one evening. So do we want to continue with this discussion? And I mean, we're sort of at the point, I'm not even sure if Patrick and Sheila have time if we start now. Do we want to continue with this and move that to the next meeting? What, Patrick, Sheila, Tracy, do you have an idea about how long their time will take?
I think that they could present comfortably within 20 minutes. And I think that the closing of their presentation might be a perfect place to begin to circle back to what that, understanding what a transition looks like, to helping the committee think more about some of the key issues you've raised and had questions about, like high school structures and the strengths and values and practices and cultures at each high school, and how those things get incorporated into a process, as well as several other things. So I think it will circle back around and you will talk about these topics again.
Okay.
Easily.
All right. So we will come back to this. Let's have Patrick and Sheila go ahead and present in whichever order you guys want to do that.
Well, we're sort of presenting together, so.
Perfect.
So.
Okay, so yeah, we were asked to, at a pretty high level, talk through what the transition process looks like, and had a lot of conversations, talked with Tracy some, we each talked with our teams, and thought about the transition in a couple of different phases. Because in a way, we have anywhere from, say, 8 to 20 months, and we were kind of going back and forth between those two timelines. So if we were to try and transition from, if we assumed a yes vote, which is the only thing that would prompt the need to make the transition in November, and we wanted to be operational for the following July 1, that's an 8-month window. An alternative was to think about it from a November vote to 2 July 1s from that point, which would put us in a 20-month transition window. And so as we went back and forth on that, I think where we landed was to think about this idea of transitioning in phases. And phase one, we sort of call it the 2-3-1 phase, where we go from 2 boards, which is what we currently have, to 3 boards, which is what we would have for a period of time when we added a new merged district board, down eventually to 1 board once that board became fully operational and the others ceased to exist. This is essentially the same concept that we went through with the Act 46 process, where we added another board to what were multiple boards and then eventually became 1. And so in this 8-month phase, we would be looking at really focusing the consolidation on governance and business operations. And so that's where we'd be looking at the HR perspective and transitioning employees. We look to be building a budget, right? So in this 8-month window, the new board would be formed and would begin building its operational budget. They'd have to build a set of policies, and we'd want to really think critically about what family and community engagement would look like in this period of time as we're beginning to really form this new entity and make it legal and get it to the point where it can become operational. And that felt like a really important first step, as opposed to doing that simultaneously as we would do the things that we're proposing here in what beyond phase 1, because it's really more than just year 1. This is something that would take some time. It would take probably more than a year to transition in some of these other ways. But it would be after this 8-month window that when we have a new board that is functioning, that can make decisions, that has hired its central office staff, like the structures would be in place to make some decisions and do this work beyond phase 1, where we'd be looking at more of the streamlined, consistent, consolidated curriculum instruction and assessment. We'd want to be thinking about contract negotiations, figuring out transportation contracts and what that looks like with a new vendor or new contract with the same vendor, and then thinking about the property management. So in the first year of operation, while we're figuring this all out, students could go to the same high school they go to now, the same middle school they go to now, as we got these structures in place to be able to make informed decisions and make decisions about, well, in the future, which would be the middle school, which would be the high school, or do we keep 2 7-12s? Some of that is work that can happen through this process as we write the articles of agreement. Some of that could be work that happens under the new board with the new central office leadership team working with that new unified group of teachers and support staff, et cetera. But that's sort of the concept here, the 8-month governance and business transition, and then the multi-month transition that would follow that for curriculum instruction, contract negotiations, transportation, and property management.
So that said, kind of what Patrick has already alluded to, that first year, teachers, students, families would experience the same thing that they do now. It would look and feel the same as it does now. So I think that will help also to ease some stress and tension around the timeline, if people can know that is very much the future and that much of this will be built together as we continue along. So we're calling the next part of that the collaborative opportunities looking beyond. So when we think about what those planning opportunities are around, this is, there's a fair amount of detail associated with each of these bullets. And as Patrick said, we're staying at a very high level, but you can imagine as we're considering, potentially merging middle schools, potentially merging high schools, there would be so much that needs to be done around students who receive IEP services or other support services in the district, and how that's going to look and feel in a merged district. We would be planning and prepping for middle and high school consolidation and what that would look like, and those decisions around all of that work. And we would begin transitioning to combined co-curricular programs, athletics, the arts, theater, and so forth, while implementing central office efficiencies. A big part of this would be branding and a new identity. That would be an amazing amount of community engagement that we would be doing. And I see that as a very exciting opportunity for our districts to really build together that new future.
And so this is where, over the course of realistically what would be 3 to 5 years, we would move from our current state to a place where we could sustain and expand the learning opportunities at the middle and high school levels. Over that period of time, ideally as much through attrition as possible. I think, again, reflecting back on Nature Report, he spoke about that quite a lot, that so much of what we're looking to do can happen through attrition. And that is much easier on organizations when you can manage change that way. And that's part of why it will take a little longer to do it in that way. But in doing so, when we have the plan, we can take advantage of attrition in a really intentional way that moves us toward the plan. In the absence of the plan, it's hard to do that. But eventually we can get to a place of increased cost efficiencies, both in schools and central office, et cetera, throughout the organization. Keeping that focus on equity for students, that has to be a real key driver in the work that we do. In that time, we can merge governance, merge the middle and high schools if that's what's decided is the right way to go. Potentially expand the grade levels that are served at the middle school, as has been discussed. And really expand that concept that Nate spoke again a lot about, that cost-effective mindset throughout the larger organization, this new district that would be formed. I think the reality is, even with some of these changes and the anticipated savings, and as folks acknowledged, if we don't apply that cost-effective mindset, we could fall short in finding the savings that we know we need to find to become sustainable. So we're going to have to really think about that, no matter what sort of organization we find ourselves under.
Okay, so this is my chance to bridge the thinking about a multi-year transition with a lot of the pieces of the discussion that you just had. If you conclude as a board that it's worth recommending a merger, formation of a unified union to your electorate, because you believe it puts you in the best position to expand opportunities for students, address and expand your attention to equity, and capitalize on the efficiencies that might be available to you, in part through merging your middle and high schools, expanding grade levels served at the middle schools, and implementing something like a cost-effective mindset at elementary and middle and high school. The Articles of Agreement set up some very long-lasting guardrails for that. You are required to spell out the parameters for the first year of operations in particular areas, and we have some wiggle room in the articles to address other matters and be strategic about how you can frame things that the new board and the new entity need to do to be sure that some of the issues, questions, and concerns you just raised would be addressed positively in the future. So the pieces of the transition plan that we are required to address in the articles are transportation of students, contracts and collective bargaining agreements, the assignment of staff in the first year, and curriculum. And optional articles, one of which we've discussed was school of attendance, but we've also discussed a number of other optional articles that you could add, and I'll mention some of those in a minute. When we're thinking about the required articles related to the plan of the first year of operations. Given the hypothetical transition timeline that Patrick and Sheila just explained, they could sound something like students will attend the school where they would have attended based on residence prior to the merger. And maybe you could weave in some language around choice between elementary schools following the parameters that currently exist in your districts around elementary schools, or even middle and high school for that matter. Language might say that the collective bargaining agreements will be honored while a new collective bargaining agreement is being developed. That's required by law, but it's also useful to say that clearly in the articles. The articles could say that other contracts will be honored until new ones are agreed upon. So when we're talking about contracts, we're talking about vendor contracts, copier leases, transportation contracts, contracts with other employees. So that's what an article in that area might sound like. We might have an article that sounds something like staff will be assigned per the terms of their collective bargaining agreements, or consistent with a new collective bargaining agreement, if it's depending on when that's agreed upon. And they would be at the school they would have been assigned to otherwise, except if something else is agreed upon, and again, consistent with applicable provisions in the CBA. An article could say that you would follow the curriculum for each of the forming districts in the respective schools. So in the beginning, curriculum might be a little different until there's an opportunity to revise curriculum in a multi-year process with the new board, the merged faculty, and a thoughtful collaborative process. And the articles could say transportation contracts will be honored and transportation will be provided consistent with the current policies of MAUSD and ANWSD. And you might even want to put some language in the articles that says something about pending adoption of a new policy on transportation and new contracts after the first year. And you might even add something aligned to the concerns you've raised about the duration of bus rides, and include an expectation that the new board consider routes and rides comparable to pre-merger route length and ride durations for students. My recollection of the transportation study is that you can do that through the shuttle model, even if you merge middle and high schools. But the key point is you can put some of those guardrails around what the board must consider in the articles of agreement without potentially unduly limiting them in their authority going forward. So again, as Pat said, the transition period in that first full school year is very much about merging governance and business operations, and then moving into a planning process that's highly collaborative. And so you might include some other articles around issues to guide, to set guardrails going forward. We've talked about school closure, and that's on the list to come back to. Preference for supervisory district structure. You could include an article requiring the new board to consider community involvement strategies and site-based councils. Again, I mentioned transportation, some considerations that you could ask the new board to review with regard to transportation. You also could include articles related to what I sense you are increasingly defining as the goals of merging and the what you want to get out of it. I remember Nate saying repeatedly that it could be important to talk about what are the benefits of forming a merge or forming a unified union. What are the benefits of merger? Why is this important? And what do you expect to get out of that? And you could include that explicitly in your articles to shape parameters for the future, being mindful of the fact that in some areas the law gives you the authority to set those limits, parameters, and expectations for a year. Some of the articles are much longer lasting and can only be amended by a more formal voting process of the electorate. And there is precedent for 1 year, 2 year, and 4 year articles, and sometimes even more, that set those guardrails and expectations for the governing body going forward. So, the last set of articles that you have to tackle would address those guardrails for the first year and beyond within the parameters that we have.
Thanks, Tracy. I guess we have 8:20. Communication. Yeah, sorry. Sarah, you had a question?
This is a really strange question, maybe, or obvious, but how does the, if you merge, like the hiring of a superintendent go? Like, what do you do with, do you maintain your same 2 superintendents for like a transitional period? Is that an article we'd have to encounter as this? Like, I'm just like, when do you have to kind of, or is that for a new board to kind of make those decisions? I have no idea. I just was curious.
Yep. The shortest answer is that you're obligated by law to honor the contracts that are in place. So it would transitions for things like the number of superintendents and the structure of administrative support in your new entity would have to take into account the contracts that are in place and plan a phased approach to whatever you design as your appropriate staffing for your newly merged structure.
So that's not on us. That's just on, that would be something after. Okay, just wanted to check.
Rebecca?
A follow-up to Sarah's question would be similar for teachers, right? Is how would that impact teachers? I am assuming the first year would be similar because we would probably stay in our, I'm a teacher here in the district, so we'd probably stay in the same buildings and such, but then the following years could be different. So that would be with our collective bargaining units, they would figure that out. So that would be something they would negotiate, I'm assuming.
In my experience, that's something that the union definitely feels strongly about having a voice in. And I think it's likely that that would be part of a new set of negotiations.
And can I just ask how that has gone in other districts? Like, is it seniority? People have just been asking me, like, how does that work? Like, yeah, in other districts, like that have pulled together, like, we just don't know how that has worked. Different models.
Well, Vermont NEA could help you with some of the models that are elsewhere. I see 2 main models, and one is that your seniority is extended across the district, but with that means the possibility of redeployment elsewhere. The other alternative is to maintain your seniority as you have it now. And if a staff reduction is made in one setting, the person would have to reapply elsewhere. So there's pros and cons to both, and there's options. And again, both Pat and Nate have spoken about the opportunity to capitalize on attrition. In my experience, we didn't have problems with that. We were able to work it out and take care of people in ways they felt okay about.
Sure. The other question I have is about curriculum, and the idea of the curriculum would stay as long as we're all in our own buildings for high school. And for graduation requirements, the next thing is when if we were to merge Mount Abe's district and ANWSD, like how do you, and this is not one we have to think about right now, but it's something we should be thinking about, is how do you merge graduation requirements between the two districts, and how do we handle that, right? And so that's a huge question between two districts. And so I really hope people are being thoughtful about that, and that takes a while to think about, because if you're a junior or a sophomore in the midst of this, that's a pretty big deal to them.
Yep. So there's two parts. One is creating the vision for the graduation requirements in the curriculum on the whole. And then there's a grandfathering clause or a phasing in component. And the planning is a big process, and the transition is definitely a multi-year process. 4 years to get all of your students through in a way that's respectful to the opportunities that they had before you redesigned.
Sure. Thank you.
Erica, go ahead.
I just want to ask, will we have time to discuss this in the next meeting? Because I feel like we're kind of rushed right now, but I do have some questions.
Yes. Heard loud and clear, as well as circling back on some of the things that came up in that long discussion about the Levinson report. If you have something quick, though, go ahead and ask.
No, just it's more of a comment, but just like, or a concern, I would say, that if it sounds like kind of a relief, like, oh, we can just make all these articles, like, okay, things are just going to stay, and then the board will figure it out. But on the other hand, it does seem to me like it's harder to get people to vote for something that is like, well, the board will figure it out, right? Like, so I just want to have discussions about that.
Yep, understood. Okay. Let's move on to communication key points. Go ahead, Erica.
Well, we had a very long discussion about the presentation of the K-12 New Solutions draft report.
Anybody else have other things?
So we also heard a discussion or presentation from the superintendents on a possible transition plan if we go ahead with a merger.
Anything more we want to say about the K-12 new solution discussion, or are we good that with what?
Just for continuing on with the conversations, I think would be important to communicate. And that it was a pretty high level look at a transition, like it's not overly at a strong detailed level yet, just the broad strokes.
Thanks, sir. Kevin, go ahead.
I think for the Levinson report, I think we should note that it was, I don't know if customized is the right word, but it was addressed, was was contracted to address some specific issues in the MAUSD district that could influence this merger study committee, but it wasn't about necessarily how it didn't address a lot of aspects of the merger. So it was mostly a MAUSD document.
You're muted, Mary Kate.
I'm muting myself when I speak. Sorry. Thank you. Dave.
Thank you. So to go back to the discussion and the Nate Levinson report and the notion that many, if not all, of the alternate proposals included eliminating the high school. I think there's a real dichotomy going on in our community. There's a great deal of love and caring and appreciating our high school. And I think that there's a lot of support for the high school. I also think that there are a whole bunch of communities in Vermont that have elected not to operate a high school. And this is a trend being promoted nationwide for choice. Choice is such a wonderful sounding word, isn't it? I got an email today that said, we should just give all the kids money and let them choose where they want to go to school. And so we shouldn't discount out of hand the notion that some people think the smart thing to do for our district is to close the high schools and give kids a voucher to go to whatever school they want.
Erica?
Oh, I just wanted to add that I think we should note that the discussion was a very good discussion. I mean, for me, I felt like I really heard a lot of, different perspectives that were useful in helping me think about the situation in Mount Abe and bring that to my perspective on the merger.
All right. I think we probably, Tracy, go ahead.
Before we transition, I just wanted to be clear if you wanted me to support the co-chairs or if perhaps committee members who are representatives of the respective boards would be willing to follow up with the two boards about their reactions to the topics you discussed and any feedback they have for you on the kind of questions or areas of curiosity that you raised.
And it's probably more on Addison Northwest in terms of questions, and then going to Mount Abe Union School District Board to get maybe some answers, or I don't know if Patrick can do that directly with Nate Levinson, but
yeah, I'd be happy to work with Nate to make sure, or Pat to make sure he gets the question, and Keith is in the center of my screen. Perhaps maybe I could pass my notes on to you for review and consideration.
Yeah, and the board for MAUSD has established a process for people to submit questions, so we can
great.
We can work that.
Yeah, okay. And I think there were some, Tracy, we can, when co-chairs meet with you, we have notes of questions that people brought up in this discussion, but Keith, you're good with checking with the board?
Yeah, I'll contact our chair tomorrow and see what he thinks about adding it to a future meeting agenda.
Great, thank you. Okay, public comment. I see Herb Olson. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for listening to me yet again. Maybe won't happen all that much longer. We'll see. I have a statement to make on behalf of the Starksboro Save Our Schools committee. Not making it on behalf of the town officials. We've consulted with them. Public meetings require public meetings. So, I think from their direct communications with you, how they feel about their local elementary school and what they would like to see from the Merger Study Committee. But again, we're not speaking on behalf of them. You should know that Starksboro is actively preparing to withdraw from the Mount Abraham Union School District. We're preparing. We haven't made a decision, but we are actively, doing the kind of analysis that you would need to go through in order to make that decision. We wouldn't do it without, the support of the town as a whole, and there'd be a lot of process involved in that. But that being said, we're doing the financials. We're trying to figure out the operational issues, and I guess maybe people need to know why. Why are we pursuing this? It's not like we love to do this stuff. It's not like we want to be an independent school. We woke up in the morning, decided we wanted an independent school. It's not that we want high school choice. It is about a threat to our local elementary school, Robinson School, which we feel is an effective school, a cost-effective school, and effective in educating our students. And it does a good job there. So why is that under threat? As soon as this committee, this isn't intentional, I'm just telling you the facts. When this committee came into existence, it put the continued existence of elementary schools in the Mount Abe district in danger. Because if you merge two districts, you can have new articles. In fact, you have to have new articles of agreement. You've been going through those. And in new articles of agreement, those articles may not include a provision providing for a town vote before the school is closed. So, and members of your committee have made proposals to have a discussion and vote about that. And that hasn't happened. So why not wait? Why wouldn't we wait until, I don't know, sometime later on in the summer or the fall to make this decision? The reason is the timeline, the statutory timelines for getting a withdrawal process, a withdrawal decision voted on by the local town and ratified by the other member towns in the district. And that takes some time, as Lincoln knows. It takes some time. And frankly, the timeline is such that we need to make a decision on filing a petition with our select board. I'd say plus or minus 30 days. And that doesn't seem like it's in your timeline, but I just, maybe you didn't appreciate, what we're facing in terms of a timeline. So what we're saying is, in order for, again, we're currently engaging in withdrawal activities. In order for Starksboro to suspend its withdrawal activities, we would like to see the Merger Study Committee guarantee in writing in proposed articles of agreement that an elementary school program should not be closed, repurposed, or otherwise terminated for students in any of grades K through 6 resident in the town without the approval of the voters of that town. That's a motion that I think has been made. Not really a whole lot of discussion, and frankly, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of support on this Merger Study Committee to do that. So let's see. It may not be the only issue around withdrawal, but that certainly is the critical issue that is certainly being talked about in Starksville. And I thought I should let you know that. That's where we're at. Thank you very much. Hey, you know, everybody wants, one of the things is interesting. Lincoln's already voted to withdraw. We look like we don't have any choice. We're going to have to withdraw too. It's really striking that nobody has reached out to these communities from the organizations, the educational entities, to say, geez, you know, we'd like to have you stay. We think we're all better off together. I think we're all better off together. But we've never heard anything like that. And over time, like, you know, some members have said, over time, resentments grow, you know, and you get further distanced. And it's not a good path. Anyway, I don't hold out any hope for that, I guess. I appreciate the support of many members of this committee, as well as the Mount Abe School Board in our efforts to keep our school open. And I just wanted to let you know where we are at. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Herb. Sandy Lee.
Thanks, Mary Kate. It was really, I didn't make the beginning of the meeting, so I missed some of the commentary, but what I was able to catch, it was really nice to hear from Virgin's community members, to hear from Virgin's board members, the reaction to the because I think one of the challenges we've had in general is how to have these processes happening at the same time. I think it's just an ongoing struggle, and we have our own issues at MAOSD, but you know, what I have, the questions that I have that would be helpful to learn from the Merger Study Committee is truly, you know, what is the, you know, Addison, you know, Northwest Supervisory District, what is their feeling really about merger of middle school and high school? You know, is that really a possibility? Because, you know, the pieces and parts that have been broken down by Nate in different pieces, you know, envisions something happening, I think, at the middle school and high school level that we as Mount Abe really need to make some decisions about as well. And so it's great to actually hear back from what's happening in the other district. You know, because I did hear some commentary of, and I totally get it, you know, I'm proud of Mount Abe. I think you know, I do a lot of Addison United soccer, spent a lot of time over at the Virgin's high school fields and facilities. And so I'm pretty familiar with them. And I know that the Virgin's and the area community is also proud of their schools. You know, there was talk about how there was this idea of, you know, closing Mount Abe. You know, some of the mergers envision Virgin's high school coming to Mount Abe and making Virgin's the middle school. And it's kind of hard to figure out how to evaluate that if it's not, if it is it possible? Is it not possible? Is that something that the other district really wants? And I don't know what the community engagement piece is and really figuring that out from, you know, the other communities. You know, we've done a lot of work because we have this ongoing, you know, work we're doing with Nate Levinson, and we're getting a lot of input from community members, but I'm really interested to know overall what's happening there, because it's really hard to make these decisions when a lot of it depends on a merger, if that really was the direction that people actually go. You know, I think some of the proposals, a couple of them, you know, they're all in the Nate Levinson report and they're all lettered. So, you know, the report in depth goes through each one. Not all of them call for Mount Abe closure. I just wanted to be clear. Some of them thought about making Virgin's be a middle school and Mount Abe be a middle school and build a countywide high school, you know, that really merged and, you know, it was I think, proposal D, you know, and really looked at, can we optimize in some way all of the benefits in the communities while at the same time pulling more numbers together for a more robust curriculum. So we have a really long, I suspect a pretty long meeting at Mount Abe tomorrow. It's our regular board meeting, but we're going to be asking a lot of questions and doing work regarding Nate Levinson's report. And so I hope people in all the communities who are part of this committee will watch so that they can see firsthand, the issues that we're dealing with, and then to think about that and how it affects the merger.
Thanks, Sandy. Rob Backlund.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Thank you guys for all your work, all your time you put in. I think you have a lot more time to put in. And I say that piggybacking off of the comment that was made by committee member Erica in regards to, I see it as kicking the can down the road in the sense of just writing articles of agreement and letting a new board of whatever Addison North Unified School District would be figure out the plan. This is your work to do. You have to have the numbers. You have to have the plan. Where are kids going to school? Where is the savings? People are no longer naive to this idea that unification just saves money. Because if it did, we wouldn't be here tonight, right? 2 unified districts under Act 46, now having to scramble again to become a bigger district. You guys have to put in the legwork to show people that this could possibly be sustainable fiscally, financially, and that it will improve outcomes for our kids first and foremost. If you don't do that legwork, if you say some board in phase 2 or phase 3, some mythical board of made up of people that either are in this room tonight or aren't, are going to figure that out, it's not going to work. You're not wasting my time, you're wasting your own time. I hate to say that, but that's just the truth. And then my second point is, I hope this committee grapples with this question. I know you're talking about what is there to gain. And trust me, I think there could be a lot to gain for our kids, finding some synergies between our districts. I really, really do. But I want you to grapple with the question, what is there to lose? It's a question that I would say in Mount Abe, we haven't grappled with as a board. And I think we should, because people in the town of Starksboro, people in the town of Lincoln, I've spoken to people in Addison, they feel like they've lost something. And I really encourage you to ask that question. What could we lose if we go all in, all at once? Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Marguerite Gregory.
Yes, thank you. So I've been very encouraged tonight to hear members of the committee begin to explore ideas for collaboration, and I'm glad to see the issue of collaboration on a future work plan. This was something that was voiced over and over again at the community input event. I would like to see a compilation of the community input made available to the public. I'd like to see a real substantive discussion around collaboration, and I like Brad Johnson's idea of establishing a subcommittee to look at the issue in depth. I'd like to see teachers on the committee. I disagree that local communities will be too emotional to think rationally about whether a school should close or remain open. Parents want the best education and the best peer group configurations for their kids. There is a counter argument that the further from the local school decisions are made, and the more top-down the decisions, the less it will address the needs of the students. So, thank you.
Thanks,
I also
Marguerite.
want to say that one more thing, that in my kids our children didn't live in Starksboro when they were in high school, but from everything I've heard talking to parents in our neighborhood, there's universal support for Mount Abe. And people are, feel the teachers were good. Their kids did well in the school. So just want to let you know that.
Thank you, Marguerite. All right. One more, Nancy Cornell.
Actually, Denny Casey had his hand up before I did, so perhaps he should speak, and I hope I
do
could
not
finish.
see. Oh, I see, Denny. Yeah, go ahead. Without the hand prompt, it doesn't
I'm sorry.
go to the front of my screen. But
I'm
go ahead.
computer illiterate.
Me too.
Well, you know, it's extremely upsetting to me that some of you folks have made up your minds that towns who wish to keep their local elementary school should not have the right to do so. I don't think there's very many members on the merger study committee who live in Starksboro. And it's upsetting to me that a lot of you folks think that people in Starksboro are incapable of deciding whether their local schools should remain open or just become a memory. And I'm sure if you don't know, I'll tell you right now that Moncton and Bristol, the two towns who aren't in jeopardy of losing their schools, can easily vote to close Robinson School. I just don't believe that that's a good practice. And I think, you know, I've listened to several of your meetings and I hear the same people say the same thing, that, you know, the town shouldn't have the right to vote. They're just, you know, they're incapable of doing it. Their emotions get in the way. I heard Ms. Andrus earlier tonight talking about losing Virgins High School. And she sounded a little bit anxious about that. And I'm glad, because now I think maybe she has somewhat of an understanding what we go through here every day and have for the last year and a half. So I thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, Dennis. Go ahead, Nancy Cornell.
I've gone to a number of your meetings now too, and I understand that your work is very difficult and these are big issues. Tonight was the first time I felt encouraged by listening to your conversation. I think it started when Carol McBride started talking about ideas that she saw emerging partly from the K-12 Solutions Report and partly from the conversation, ideas about new ways to collaborate in ways that really expand opportunities for students. And I mean, Nate's report, his draft report, got me thinking about those sorts of things too. When you can imagine, without merging governance, the number of ways that our middle schools and high schools could work together, courses we could offer for both kids in both communities, both districts, that neither one of us could offer by ourselves, all kinds of personalized learning opportunities that could be offered both through remote learning together, and also in-person learning through, you know, occasional, frequent opportunities for the kids in the same class in the two different schools to get together, both virtually and really in person. So I got pretty excited about all that, but I also do want to say that I'm very worried about the mess we're in, as Dave Sharp described it. We're still in a mess over here. And nobody I know in Starksboro really wants to withdraw from the district. We all value and treasure our high school and hope that we don't have to trade it off at the end of the day for financial reasons. I think that would be a shame, and nobody wants that. So I just want to say we don't want to withdraw. We do want to stay together as a district in the Mount Abe Unified School District, but we are facing a looming timeline that's pushing us toward having to petition to withdraw. And your committee can stop that. You can give us a way to stay. And we need you to really think seriously about doing that as soon as possible, to make a commitment, to give an assurance, because otherwise, given the statutory timelines, we're not going to have any other choice but to petition to withdraw. And no one wants that. So I hope you'll please consider it, and please consider doing it soon, because if we feel we have to withdraw, we're going to have to begin the process, right at the end of March, beginning of April. And we don't want to have to do that. Thanks.
Thanks, Nancy. I don't see any other public comment. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Keith Morrow moved. All those in favor? Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? All right. Have a good evening, everybody.